Are you ready to break free from a conventional life and achieve financial independence through your version of tiny living, but you're feeling stuck trying to figure out the money part? Does the pressure to conform to societal norms make it even more difficult to embrace an unconventional lifestyle? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Laura Lynch, host of the Less House, More Moolah podcast, where every Thursday I'll bring you captivating interviews with individuals who have successfully made the transition to tiny living. They defied expectations and are thriving in their unique lives. We'll also dive deep into industry resources to address common financial concerns on your tiny journey. Together, we'll explore the emotional and practical aspects of pursuing an alternative lifestyle. I will describe a clear framework for project planning and cash flow management. Our goal is to intentionally build financial security and make a positive impact through our alternative American dream. So gear up for an exciting and empowering journey to create a life that truly resonates with you. Let's dive into today's episode and take the first steps towards financial independence and purpose through tiny living. Well, John Cullum, thank you so much for joining me today on the Less House, More Moolah podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I love your concept, and I've learned a lot from reading your articles and looking at some of the prior blogs.
Yeah, well, we are having conversations about tiny living for sure on this podcast, and bringing you here today, I think, is a really important component of why I am focused on tiny living, because I feel like people have the ability to focus on something more impactful than their roof if they choose to. And so I'm delighted to have you here so that we can dig into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of what someone might want to do with their money if they're not going to spend their entire life focusing on building bigger and bigger houses for themselves over time. So if you would please share with the listeners your role at the American Heart Association and your why behind your work.
Well, thank you. I'm a senior advisor. I work with donors and advisors as they're working with their clients, creating a philanthropic and financial plan. When I'm working directly with the donor, I'm helping them understand what they want to do, how they want to do it, the impact that it can have, and then give them some ideas on how they can do it a little bit more efficient than the way they might think they want to do it. But also always get them to go back to their attorney, financial planner, and CPA to make sure what they're doing is correct. My why goes back about 3 generations. My grandfather died in the 30s, leaving a family of 7. He had a heart attack and died, and back in those days, there was nothing to do for it. And so we fast forward to 1980. My dad died from a massive heart attack. He was 59. I was in college. Unfortunately, he had died the week after my mother did from cancer, but he had cardiovascular disease. Out of those 7 children, 5 of them died before the age of 60 with cardiovascular disease. I've got 2 siblings. They both have had bypass surgery. And I am 65, and I have a pacemaker I've had for 9 years, and I have 6 partial blockages. So that's my why. I live it every day. To go the next generation to the 4th generation, I've got 2 sons. One of them seems to take after my side of the family versus his mom's, but both of them have cardiac CT scans to understand where they are today. So as life does whatever it's going to do to them, they'll know what the baseline is when they're in their early 30s. So that's my why.
Yeah. As I think you got a glimpse of in our prior conversation, my dad passed away, 2 strokes, very young, age 68, also diabetic. It has been a sort of journey for me throughout my life to stay focused on how do I take the best care of myself in order to make sure that I do have a long life. My dad's mother is 95. My BFF, my Grammy, and I want to be like her when I grow up, right? So how do I take good care of myself? And so you and I first kind of encountered each other after I finished up with the financial planning conference last year, and then was able to do a curriculum that you all put together with the Financial Planning Association around charitable giving. And that's really inspired some of the work that I'm doing with people that are living tiny, that are able to, like I said earlier, focus more on some other impact they want to make in their life. So you and I share this charitable mindset. What do you think it is that makes people charitable?
That's an interesting question. I've done a lot of research on it, and there actually is part of this is the brain. There's two parts of the brain that react to when you do something that makes you feel good. And charitable giving, I've always said, when you see people giving away money, you're seeing them at their very best. They're doing something that they want to do. Sometimes it's tax beneficial. Sometimes it's not. People just want to give away and they want to help. So I think it's a combination of seeing what other people are doing and thinking, well, I'm like them. I should be doing this as well. And then their why. And, with Donors to American Heart, it's generally a survivor, or they've lost someone and they've seen the need to have research. I see it with colleges where people received a scholarship when they went through college and they want to create a scholarship for someone else. Could be at a library where they grew up reading books and they want to encourage reading. It could be a social program where someone grew up not as fortunate as I, and they want to help others. The Boys and Girls Club is a really good example of that those children probably don't have after school care because they are latchkey children. And so people do things to really create a better world to live in. That seems, kind of funny to say to a degree, but it's really true. I see that all the time with donors as I'm talking to them.
Yeah, I really feel like the tiny living community, many folks in this community are concerned about making the world a better place and having behaviors and a lifestyle that creates a better world moving forward. So I love that for our community that they're already thinking about this. Do you think that age and demographics play a role in this mindset, this attraction to giving?
Absolutely. If I were to look at my parents, they were the traditionalists, the generation of World War II. My parents were born in 1920. They grew up trusting the government. They grew up World War II, Franklin Roosevelt. I was born in 1958. I grew up with Vietnam and with John Kennedy being assassinated, Martin Luther King being assassinated. I grew up where you didn't trust people nearly as much as what you did in the generation. The next generation, they were the first generation to be latchkey children. Their parents divorced. Mom had to go to work. They had to be independent. And we can go on down. What I see with a lot of the reporting that I read, a lot of the research, many of the people today that are younger are giving to more social programs. And they're doing more things about the environment. Whereas in my generation, people want to make sure that their money is pigeonholed for a purpose, and they want to make sure it's not used for administration of an organization. But there are fewer people in the generation before me, but they're the ones that would just give out of the goodness of their heart and really don't want anything in return. We also see that not only with giving of assets, but of their time. More people volunteer for things that are more socially impactful. Again, for the opportunity to work with an organization that's going to feed children or is going to take care of elderly people. It's all very different today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways for people to make an impact. And people want to make different types of impact. And some people want to make an impact by spending more time with their family or by experiencing the world. For folks that are specifically trying to create an impact that's outside of themselves, how do you see people defining that? How are they kind of picking or deciding what kind of legacy that they want to make or leave?
Well, if I were practicing today as the CFP, I am a CFP, but if I was practicing, the first thing I would start is asking them the type of charitable contributions they've made in their life. Where do they get more joy out of that contribution? And it doesn't have to be money. It could be reading to a child. When my children were in school, I did a English as a second language program. And I found that very rewarding. My children had the opportunity to go to school with kids from 16 different countries. So I got the opportunity to see children that, again, didn't have the advantages that mine did to really prosper. So I think that's one way that people do it. That's one of the questions I would ask. I would ask, too, if money was not an object, what would they like to see their contribution to do? If money was not an object, you could give whatever there was. And then it's interesting to see what really comes up. I personally have a passion for gardening. And I think gardening is relaxing for me, but it also creates a tranquil space that people can really go and enjoy life in a real calm, reflective space. So that's something that's really important to me. So I just think it depends on the person, but having that kind of conversation to understand what's touched them in their life. Again, a lot of our donors, I'm talking to them, they've had heart disease. They've had a family member's had heart disease. The most touching conversations I ever have is someone who's had a heart transplant, because that is a really, really tough road to go, because you've got to make sure the heart's going to match. And the rejection doesn't reject it. You end up dying from it. And most of the people that get those, their health is good, but their heart is about to go. And so they're facing death. And then they've had the gift of life. And so it just, it really just depends. But having those kind of conversations, I think, is really important. And if you're not working with a financial planner or an attorney or a CPA to do this, just do that yourself. Think, understand what's really important to you in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree on the gardening space. I think I come at it a little bit from the resilience angle, and I've written about this in my investment philosophy that, we're in a time of compounding change. We have no idea what our world is going to look like 50 years from now. And so for me, I plan to live another 50 years. I want to make sure that the people that I work with are thinking about other ways of being resilient beyond their portfolio. And one of those ways is, being able to maybe pick up a hammer and being able to maybe grow a little bit of your own food and, just have some of those important skills that we as humans had for millennia that we sort of left behind once we, got into our current working world, the Industrial Revolution and all of that. And so I think that there's nothing more fulfilling to me than being able to go out to my garden and pick the things that I'm going to make for dinner, because I did that with my own hands. And, it takes a little bit of skill and research to do that successfully. And to be able to provide for, the people that I care about with food in that way is really important to me. And so the regenerative agriculture space and the loss of our topsoils and all of that has really come on my radar. And so I love that you say, go back and look at the things that have, motivated you in the past, because that helps you sort of dig deeper into what's really important to you. And it really all comes down to values and the way that, you approach the world. So do you think that there's like an age that people start to think about this? Is it ever too young to start thinking about the impact that you want to leave during your lifetime or after?
I see all of those. I think once people are older and their friends start dying, they see their life in a different way. I just had a wonderful friend from college who just died just recently. And, when Glenn's death was, when I learned of Glenn's death, it always makes you think about yourself. That could be me. And so that makes it a little bit more real. I think when you go through any type of a lifestyle change, a birth, a death, a marriage, a divorce, moving, buying a new home, getting married, getting divorced, all those things makes you look at your life and say, where am I with this? What do I need to do? Charitable giving, though, my first memory of that was I was 5 years old. I lived in a little tiny town in South Carolina, and my mother was collecting canned goods to have for a carnival at school. And I went with her. And that's the first. My father was a pharmacist. He would frequently, on the way home from the drugstore at night, stop by someone's house and drop medicine off, someone who couldn't drive and didn't have a car, or someone who was elderly. That was charity. It was the charity of his time. But that was my first memory. So I've grown up with understanding paying back is really important. Now that I have the resources, I can do it. I do it in a different way. I have a scholarship, for example, in my father's name. He was, a small-time pharmacist. That's really important to me, providing somebody the education that my father really had to struggle to get. I'm obviously very generous at American Heart. I have a planned gift here. That means a lot to me because the research that has occurred over the last 100 years, because we're celebrating our 100th anniversary next year, took the death that was imminent to my father, my grandfather, to my siblings and myself, is helped us live. It's interesting. There's about 2 million stents put in a year today, as compared to in 1968, there was 171 bypass surgeries done. Now there's about 500,000 bypass done every year, but the stent has avoided that and has caught things earlier. One of these blockages I have is, probably a year or two away from having a stent put in, but it gives the quality of life. So when you understand how that affects people yourself, it makes people more charitable to help that research. American Cancer Society has the same thing. St. Jude, they have the same thing. The American Diabetes Association. I think too, people have the idea that big charities have more overhead and use more of their funds for that. And that's not necessarily the case. We strive to keep our operating costs less than 20% of the money that we raise, and then 80% or more then goes to our mission. And most nonprofits do that. And you can go to charitynavigator.org and you can look up charities and find out how they spend that money. That's really important. That is also very generational. So when my generation probably will do that some, but the generation after me, they do that almost with every gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is definitely, I think, there's a more awareness around that, right? How much money we're all more aware of how nonprofits, businesses, everything operates. And so we're trying to make sure that dollars are doing the most amount of good. So I think that's just means that people are more educated too on giving and what to look for. So that's a really good tip on that piece. So do you think that it is, in your experience, more rewarding for people to give during their lifetime, or at least work on the planning of the giving during their lifetime, than just kind of like saying, oh, I'm going to put something in my will?
It depends on the financial resources of the person, I believe. Many people have plenty of resources, and they're not concerned about running out of money before they die. But then there are plenty of people who do worry about that. A lot of people that create a legacy gift, a planned gift that will come to the organization at death, most of those folks are single, or they're a couple with no children, because they're trying to create that legacy. My legacy is going to be my children, obviously. I have a granddaughter. But at the same point, leaving legacies other place is meaningful to me. So I think what motivates that is, again, going back to how they grew up, how they've experienced life, what's life done to them, for them, around them, how it's affected that person that helps them create what that legacy might be.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of times that it's the death of one of the spouses that creates the opportunity to sit down and then figure out what they are going to do. Most men die first, women die second. Women have a longer life expectancy than men do. So I see a lot of that as well. I do see many parents begin a giving program with their children when they're very young and start by giving them an allowance. And a portion of that has to be given to charity, whether it's something at school or whether if you're in a church or a synagogue, you would give some of the money that way. I do see people doing that, and there's a zillion books about raising children and allowances. But I think you need to see it in practice as much as anything. Giving money is easy. Writing a check or giving a credit card is really easy. But practicing that, I think, is where you really get a lot of satisfaction for that. So creating a plan gift, many of those do those, create a plan gift for an organization that they've been a continuous donor through years. Maybe it's been $5 a month that they've given or $100 a year. But it's not uncommon for us to receive a $7 million gift from somebody who's given us $100 a year. It's not uncommon at all.
Yeah, I feel like that for me, I want to figure out how I'm making an impact while I'm still alive so that I can experience that impact, right? And see it play out and see, whatever it is at that time that I, choose to put my dollars behind, see some movement in that direction. So, maybe as the younger generations, start to become more aware of their ability to impact things, that we'll be able to see more lifetime sort of work in that space. And that would be awesome. So we're going to take a little pivot because you and I had a great conversation earlier about tiny living. So let's talk a little bit about the tie between less stuff and charitable giving.
It is such a great tie because, again, I think as you do age, and I'm a collector, I'll be the first to admit that. I love to collect things. I have my entire life. But you get to a point where more is not good because you get to the point you want to downsize your life. You want to make your life simpler. You don't want to insure the collections. You don't want to have to dust things in your house. I mean, it could be something that simple, or worry about what's going to happen to something in case there's a storm. So I do see people paring down, living less. I've certainly done that. I've divorced and have live in a much smaller house than I have ever lived in my life. And now I'm doing something, I'm merging my life with someone else now, and we're doing that. We're looking at what is less. He's more of a minimalist and I'm not. So it is helped us. It's helped me look at things from different lens. What do I need? Just because I've got space to store something doesn't mean I need to store something, that I need to have it. So I really have had a very personal reconfiguration of my brain about what I have, what's really meaningful. I'm very affectionate to things that have been in my family. Well, it's time for me to share those. My oldest son is an interior decorator in New York, and William has always said to me, he says, Daddy, you've had more fun collecting these things and you've gotten so much joy about it. Now it's time for somebody else to enjoy those. So I've really taken that to heart. So that goes back to the tiny living. You have a small space and you have really what's valuable to you, really what means the most. And then if you can discard those things, you can either get a tax deduction for it or you sell them, have some additional funds. Many times you can give some significant items to a museum or to some sort of a charity, and they can either weave that into their collection or they can sell them and have some generate some revenue from it. It really unloads you. It takes that what do I want to say, the pressure on you. I had some clients years ago that were collectors of folk art and really had a beautiful collection of things that were worth $200,000 or $300,000 a piece. They were going to retire to the beach, and they made the decision number one, they were going to have a smaller house, but secondly, they no longer wanted the responsibility of having those things as a burden to them. And so they really liquidated what they had. They gave things to museums that they really can then take their children and grandchildren to see. This is where Grandpa's piece of crockery that he is worth $300,000 he gave to the museum. He got a tax deduction for it. Mm-hmm. But I see a lot of people doing that today, and it's really rewarding to see when people can adjust their values from one way where they're collecting and living big to one of living more meaningful and understanding how that meaningful can help your quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is so true that we can find a better purpose for some of the things that we have collected, allow other people to enjoy them. And kind of when you and I talked about before, when you put yourself into a smaller space, that means you have to be more intentional about what you bring into your space.
Absolutely.
Which means that you're less likely to just kind of get on that, I think it's dopamine that we get when we shop.
Right.
So we're less likely to get that, need that sort of get on that shopping high that people sometimes get on. And there are so many instances of people that become owned by their stuff, and their stuff controls their life. And I am often having this conversation about, do you own the stuff or does the stuff own you? Especially things that require, maintenance, which goes to the house. And when, we tend to collect, anything that has an engine. Mm-hmm. Little hats off to my husband. And all the carburetor conversations that we have, it's great to have a bunch of different vehicles to, ride, but then you have to maintain all those things. And that's time and that's energy that's taken away from something else. When you say yes to a thing, you're saying no to something or someone else. And so trying to figure out what that balance is in your life is, a process for sure. So when folks are thinking about taking that first step, if they say, hey, this sounds like something that I'm interested in, and I feel like I've been giving here and there throughout my life, what is a good first step for them when they're sort of going down this path of being a little bit more specific or intentional about being charitable?
I think you need to take your tax return out first and understand what you have given and what you've used as a charitable deduction. Many people today no longer itemize their deductions because they don't have the income and they take the standard deduction. So if you're not taking the deduction for the item because you can't use it, maybe you need to do that in 1 year, a lot of that in 1 year so that you can use it. So that would be one of the first things I'd suggest. I'd also think about, too, what's really important. If you have clothes, good example, we all have this, that you've not worn in a year or two, or don't fit either because they're too big or too small, why are you keeping them? Mm-hmm. So there again, it's a way you can start that process. I think once you do it, once you actually see that somebody's going to benefit from something, the dopamine kind of comes back in and you do get that high from that. And then it's the next thing. And then it's the next thing. How many set of glasses do you need? Maybe it's 10, but maybe it's 1. And so as you go through the process, I think you become more in tune to it. From a financial perspective, I'm all about being efficient with taxes because that's just the key. That's what we learn as a financial planner. So you've got to make sure that your investments are doing the right thing for you and that you have the income to live on. So many people miss the opportunity to travel because they wait too late and their health fails and then they can no longer travel. If you're going to pare down sooner, you've got less to worry about when you leave. You probably have more income because you're not paying insurance and taxes on things that you were before. And 2, that you're going to get, if you're going to sell some things or put them at auction, you'll have some additional money. Then once you travel, the goal shouldn't be to collect something to bring home. It should be the memories that you're creating. It should be the photographs that you have on your phone that maybe you put in an album or have a little booklet made. That should be where we should focus. And I think we'll get more good energy out of that as you go through life than trying to amass the fortune. There was a lady I knew many years ago, and she would go to an auction and she would hold up her paddle and just keep it up. Didn't matter what the price was. She would just, so her car was full. She had a big old Cadillac and the front seat was full. The back seat was full up to the windows. There was only a place for her to sit. When she died, she and her husband had bought the house next door to them, and they moved in because the house they lived in was so full. When she died, all those things were sold. So why did she collect that? Did it give her some good? Did she help anybody? Did she create a legacy? No. So I'm not saying her life was worthless, because I feel sure she got some joy out of it. But the same point, if you took that energy and those resources and diverted it another way, and you could guide that, the United States government is the worst charity in the world. So create that charity yourself. Maybe it's creating a donor advice fund. Maybe it's doing a charitable gift annuity with the charity. Maybe it's just giving things. Maybe it's creating an endowment at the college that you went to. If you want to get some enjoyment, and because I've worked in higher ed fundraising, is fund a scholarship somewhere where you can go meet the student. That is the most exciting thing, because that young person is getting education because of the resources that you provide. That's pretty meaningful. You're changing that life that way. And so I just think you can get so much more out of life if you do live small. That gives you more assets that you can do. Doesn't mean you live small, you live cheap. You can have the nicest small place there is. You can still have beautiful clothes and take wonderful trips and have extravagant food. That doesn't mean that just living small does that. It just means that you don't have to spend money on having a big house that nobody uses. I think anybody who's listening to this, if you look around your house, and whether you live in a 5-room house or a 50-room house, how many rooms do you actually use? So how many times do your children come home to stay with you? Once a year? They'd probably rather stay in a hotel than stay with you. Or maybe the grandchildren come stay with you and they can bunk in one room and give the parents a break. You just have to look at the world differently. I think people too look at how they grew up with an extended family. Well, we don't live that way today. Most people don't live in the community that they were raised in. Most people don't live within driving distance of their parents. So the world is just different. And so we need to look at this from a different perspective as well.
Yep, I agree with all those points. It's I was just thinking about, as I'm recording this, here I am in Florida, right? And it's really hot. It's the end of July. And I want to spend the majority of my time, anytime it's tolerable enough, I want to be outside. And yet I'm air conditioning all these square footages, and it feels so wrong. And so I just can't wait to be in my small space that is more efficient use and allows me to spend the time where I want to spend my time and not be paying for, climate control of, I guess, a lot of China that's been passed down to me. So, yeah, good.
I was at a gardening seminar recently, and it was a landscape architect from Raleigh that said NC State on the faculty. And she said that for a 1,000 square foot house, and if it rained an inch, that was 900 gallons of water that was run off. Well, 900 gallons is a lot of water. So you think about how many parking lots we have. And you think if you have a 4,000 square foot house, you have theoretically 4,000 square feet of a roof, but the water doesn't have anywhere to absorb because you've taken up 4,000 square feet of ground. Mm-hmm. So when you think about that, it goes back to living in a little space. If you don't have as much roof, the runoff's not going to be as much. Your garden's going to grow better. And even if you don't like a garden, most people like a pretty yard. If nothing else. They like a pretty yard. But you can have so much more enjoyment with that, and realizing that the resources that we're using is more valuable than having the big house that we're heating and cooling. And you're exactly right. Whether you live in Florida or Arizona, I was just on the phone with a friend who lives in Arizona. His power bill is $400 a month. The air conditioning doesn't turn off all day. So you think about the resources that you're spending, but think about what you could do. Let's say your power bill is $100. You have $300 left to do. Maybe it's something you do for your children or grandchildren. Maybe that's the charity. Maybe that's where you want to start at. Maybe you want to take your family on a vacation. Maybe you want to, give to a charity and do something on a systematic basis. It's a great thing. A lot of our donors are continuous donors. They have become donors years and years ago. We have a lot of donors that send us $5 a month or $10 a month. We'll get envelopes with a $5 bill in. We do. And then we get, $5 million gifts as well, where people want to be strategic about what they want to do. They put thought in what's meaningful. We have a lot of different ways that people can give to us, whether it's through stock or cash or real estate or life insurance or from their IRA. There's all sorts of ways. And, if any charity should be able to have that conversation with your clients. But if you can really understand what that money does and the lives that it will affect, then thinking about being more a better steward of what you have will give you the opportunity to help more people. Now, there are people that aren't charitable. There just aren't. And I was reading a report just recently that said most of the people that aren't charitable have never been charitable. They didn't grow up charitable. They've never received any impact in their head. They've not received any impact in someone who's been charitable. But if you've been to any hospital, you probably have had some charity. You went to college, you probably had somebody who's been charitably inclined to that college that's allowed you to go to a library or, have lunch in a nice student union building. There's been charity around. You might not identify it. Other people just say they don't feel like they have enough. Well, the age-old question is, how much is enough? How much do you need? And again, a good financial planner can help you look at that and understand what if you're doing everything you should be doing with insurance, long-term care, and everything that you need to be doing, how much extra will there be? Now, there's always the chance that you're going to live longer, but living smaller, more efficiently certainly will give you the opportunity to live more wisely. Because I know with me, I spend more money on any one thing is on where I live. And I would imagine most people are that way, unless you have a shopping addiction and you are on QVC or you go to Costco all the time.
Well, good. Well, John, thank you so much for sharing all of that. If folks want to follow you or the American Heart Association, where would you point them?
Our website is heart.org, HEART.org. I'm on LinkedIn under John Cullum. And then if you want to reach me, my email address is john.cullum@heart.org. And phone number is 864-517-2154. Love to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much, John. And for listeners, keep an eye out or an ear out, I guess I should say, because we're going to be talking about enough and what that means in an upcoming episode. This has been brewing around in my head. It gets really philosophical, so super into the weeds of psychology of what is enough, because I think that this is something that we have to define for ourselves. And we'll be talking about that in an upcoming episode. So again, John, thank you so much. We'll make sure that listeners can find all of your contact information in show notes. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Less House, More Moolah. To access valuable financial tips and resources tailored to your tiny living journey, join our exclusive community at thetinyhouseadvisor.com. Here you'll find a supportive network of like-minded individuals committed to helping each other navigate the challenges and celebrate the victories of embracing a minimalist lifestyle. So don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of this empowering tribe. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for another insightful episode of Less House, More Moolah, where we'll continue to explore practical solutions and inspiring stories to help you create the life you've always dreamed of.
Please see the show notes for important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC and this episode.